Hello everyone. Equipment is pretty important in Azur Lane. With the right gear setup, you can run pretty much whatever fleet composition you want for a majority of content in the game. The Gear Lab is one of the game's many sources of equipment, and while most of it is generally questionable, since it can be obtained elsewhere without needing upgrade materials, it also has a few exclusive high value pieces. In today's video, I'm going to list 10 pieces of equipment that I could see being added to the Gear Lab in the future, generally leaning towards the higher rarity tiers. So, let's get started. Starting us off is the twin 420mm SK-40 prototype. The 406mm guns intended for the German H-class battleships had an interesting design quirk to them. Their barrels were rather thick for their size. When the ships were undergoing design revisions, it was proposed the guns be rebored to 420mm, giving them bigger cannons than all known Allied battleships. Due to the cancellation of the H-class, no guns would be modified or built to this new size. Translating this to Azur Lane, the 420mm SK-40 would be crafted from the original H-class gun, offering improved damage and firepower over its predecessor, much like the Iowa gun is over the North Carolina gun, though not as extreme as going from Elite to UR. Next up, the quadruple 130mm Model 1932, Dunkirk secondaries. It's honestly baffling to me that these aren't here already. It's already in the game, but us EN players have never had the chance to get it, and as of right now it is completely inaccessible without having obtained one beforehand. It would be nice to finally have it available, even if it is just as a rare DD gun. Who knows, maybe they could implement a higher rarity version somewhere down the road. It was the first dual-purpose gun to arm a capital ship as a secondary armament, so maybe a dual-purpose version. Heading to Eagle Union, we have the 203mm 55 caliber RF Mark 16. These funny guns, mounted on the Des Moines class, don't seem particularly special at a glance. They have the same shell size and barrel caliber as their previous US heavy cruiser guns, so what makes them stand out? Autoloaders. These guns could fire at a comical rate, rivaling light cruiser guns. In-game, the shell damage wouldn't be much, if at all higher than the gold US 22203 it'd be crafted from, but would outclass it in rate of fire. I could also see this being an event shop gun instead of Gear Lab for when we inevitably get a Des Moines class as a UR heavy cruiser. The de Havilland Sea Mosquito is next. This mostly wooden fighter bomber had, despite its controversial start, proved itself extremely capable of bombing, harassing, and generally trolling the Germans over the course of the Second World War, and towards its end, the Air Ministry had put out a specification for a navalised torpedo bomber variant. The Sea Mozzie lost its 4 machine guns to make space for a nose radar, but kept its 420mm autocannons, and could carry a number of bombs, rockets, and torpedoes. For the in-game version, I could see them being a high-speed torpedo bomber armed with 2 torpedoes and 8 new RP-3 rockets. While we're on the topic of planes, we return to the French with the SO-8000 Narval. With its unique twin-boom tail and contra-rotating pusher-prop configuration, you'd have a hard time confusing this carrier-based strike fighter with anything else. 2 slightly different prototypes were ordered in 1946, and both made their maiden flights 3 years later, and that's where the trouble started. Difficulty with stability and control, and an underpowered substitute engine made hitting its expected performance metrics difficult. Had they continued to develop the prototypes, the Narval would have been a very capable fighter, for a war that ended, at this point, 5 years ago, and that really was the problem. They were developing a piston fighter going into the 1950s. This, combined with deliveries of American carrier fighters, and French working on jet fighter projects, caused the program to be cancelled. The Narval would have been armed with 620mm autocannons within its nose, and be capable of carrying up to 1,000 kilograms, 2,200 pounds, of ordnance. For its hypothetical implementation of Azur Lane, I wanted to lean into the strike fighter aspect, allowing it to intercept despite being used as a strike aircraft. However, in order to prevent it being the Wyvern but French, I've elected to make it a rocket fighter armed with 8 rockets to have good, but not great, modifiers against light and medium armour, a slightly lacking modifier against heavy armour, and middle-of-the-road damage. The Sakura Empire brings the twin 460mm 50 caliber 5th year type. These guns were designed to arm the No. 13 class battleships that would end up getting cancelled by the Washington Naval Treaty. Due to the cancellation of the ships, none of these guns would end up getting built, though any design work would have likely aided in the design and construction of the Type 94 guns on the Yamato class. The closest comparison to it in-game would be George's twin 457mm Mark A. These guns would, by comparison, have a slightly longer reload, slightly higher damage and fire HE as opposed to AP. Time for more funny guns. In this case, the Royal Navy's twin 152mm 55 quick-firing Mark 26. These guns were designed for the Design Z 1947 Minotaur class light cruisers that would be equipped with 5 of these mounts, and the later Tiger class having a pair of modified turrets. These guns would have a competitive rate of fire with destroyer-sized guns. For their in-game counterparts, the per-shot damage would be exactly the same as the triple 152mm Mark 25, the Neptune gun, as they use the same Mark 5 guns. The rate of fire, however, would far surpass said Neptune gun. Jumping the gun a bit here, since the Italians don't have a Gear Lab section yet, but next is the twin 381mm 40 caliber Model 1914. These were designed to arm the cancelled Francesco Carasilio class Super Dreadnoughts. Despite the delays and eventual cancellation of these ships, these guns would go on to serve other uses, as railroad artillery, coastal defence guns, and to arm monitors. For implementation in Azur Lane, these would be a purple gun that could be developed into the triple 381mm 50 caliber Model 1934 Littorio gun. Compared to these guns, they would have less damage and be a twin mount as opposed to a triple. Jumping back to the French for the third and final time, the twin 127mm 54 caliber Model 1948. These guns were designed to arm a number of post-war destroyers and cruisers like the rebuilt de Grasse and her cousin Colbert, to name a few. These guns were designed slightly smaller than its original 130mm caliber to enable it to fire US Navy ammunition. These destroyer guns would be developed from the twin 130mm Model 1935 and would be a general improvement over its predecessor. The final piece of equipment for this video is the twin 76mm AA Mark 37. This was a joint project between the US and UK to develop a high rate of fire water-cooled 76mm anti-aircraft gun, designated Mark 26. These guns had their genesis in the kamikaze attacks of the late Second World War, as existing AA guns proved inadequate at kill-stopping kamikaze planes. They were designed in 1945, but their lengthy development process meant they didn't enter service until over a decade later. These turrets would be unreliable and difficult to maintain, leading to a short service life. The British mounting for the gun, the Mark 6, was less ambitious, but slightly more successful, despite having a number of similar issues. For its in-game version, it'd be a decently powerful, very high rate of fire gun developed from the existing twin 76mm AA Mark 27 mount. One final thing before I send you off for today is that any gear that is currently exclusively available through the event shops, like the Rainbow Quintuple 533mm homing torps were, or the HVAR Hellcat, Sky Raider, Iowa gun, Yamato gun, there's probably a few more that I haven't written the script or remember, are likely to end up in the Gear Lab eventually after they've been archived. But that's all I've got for today. So until next time, fair winds and following seas.